Welcome to Raising Daughters, the podcast that helps parents learn the best ways to support their daughters as they navigate the high levels of stress, anxiety, pressure, and uncertainties so pervasive in our culture today. Dr. Tim Jordan is a developmental and behavioral pediatrician who has specialized in counseling girls for over 30 years and sheds light on the realities of today's young women in all facets of their lives. This is your opportunity to learn how to better support your daughters, making them feel safe, secure, and truly loved in the midst of life's ups and downs. Here is your host, Dr. Tim.
Hey there, friends. Dr. Tim Jordan back with you with a brand new podcast here on Raising Daughters. And it's summertime, but it won't last long. And this may come out actually at the end of the summer because I'm usually about a month or two ahead. But even so, I think a lot of parents sometimes wonder, is their child ready to go away to college? And I don't know if we talk enough about that. I think there's a lot of assumptions like your kid's 18, they're a senior in high school, I guess they're just ready. And so we sort of push them out the door, ready or not, here they come. And I think we can be more thoughtful about that. So I decided to ask an expert to come on the show today, a guest. Her name is Joanna Lilley. And she has a master's in counseling and therapeutic consulting work. And she's been working with young women, ages like 18, I think, to 30 for a while. She's worked in some wilderness therapy programs. She's coached students on academic probation at 2 different universities. And now she has her own business where she researches programs that can give support to your sons and daughters in those college kind of age years, I believe. So I thought it'd be fun for her to give us some insights into what she sees with young people and to talk about readiness kinds of skills. So first of all, welcome to the show, Joanna.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So you've had some good experience working with young people with different kinds of needs and things. So I'm just curious, just in general, this is too general of a question, but how can parents know that their son or their daughter, and this is Raising Daughters, but how can they know their daughter is ready?
Yeah, I actually talk about this pretty frequently, that there is a difference between being college capable and being college ready. So being college capable, I think, is what most people assume, kind of like what you were just referencing. They're 18, they've graduated, they've gotten accepted to college, they've done all the things that demonstrate that they are like college bound. So they quote unquote should be good. But what we're talking about in terms of college readiness is really like, where are they socially? Where are they mentally? Where are they emotionally? And even physically? Really just thinking about like all areas of wellness. Because in the grand scheme of things, they have demonstrated in high school that they were academically capable of, achieving some sort of accolades or whatever it was that was necessary to be eligible to be accepted to a university. But the real question is, do they have resilience? Have they experienced adversity? Do they have friends? Do they lean on other adults other than their parents for support, or parents the only support system that they have? Are they already struggling with their mental health? And are you worried that if they go off to school, that they're not going to be able to take care of themselves? So there's just so many components to it, but really like what it all kind of funnels down into is this category of college ready.
Yeah. So what are some red flags that parents, some quote unquote obvious or ones you see most commonly that would say to you, I don't think that she's ready? What are some red flags that parents can look for?
Yeah, I think I appreciate you asking this, and I kind of want to answer it in 2 like ways, right? Because we're talking about this going out potentially the end of summer. So like, here's like the 11th hour decision of like, oh no, are they ready?
Well,
and then also...
But they may have
go
a
ahead.
daughter who's a high school senior.
True.
And so it's like, what can I look for this year?
Okay. I think the biggest piece, somebody who's never been off to college, is we have to ask the question, have we given that young woman the space to figure things out on her own without any type of reminders, without any type of emotional or mental support from the parental perspective, right? And we're talking about as simple as waking up, making sure they're eating, making sure they're taking care of themselves, making sure that they're doing their homework, making sure that they're, like the list goes on. So I think to me, that's probably one of the biggest red flags is as a parent that you're seeing your daughter really struggle to self-initiate in any way, shape, or form, because that's, to me, a huge red flag that once she goes to college, which for those of us who have gone off to college, we know college is a lot of free time. Even if you are actually engaged in extracurricular clubs or activities, you still have a ton of free time. And if all of a sudden you're going to struggle with any of that time management, organization, initiation of tasks or whatever, then you're going to see a young woman who's going to unravel quite quickly.
Yeah, I wonder what you're seeing in this day and age. I see a lot of young people who, this is going to sound really judgmental. I'll never admit said this, although it's going to be recorded, but I see a lot of young people who emotionally aren't really grown up. And as they approach that senior year, they really haven't had the opportunity. Their parents have done a lot for them. I know it's a cliche, but I find it to be fairly true that a lot of them emotionally and as far as problem solving, those kinds of things that you mentioned, a lot of them have not had the opportunity. I remember we took our daughter 100 years ago to her, before college, they have not an open house, but
Orientation.
That's what I was looking for. And I'll never forget, we were sitting in the audience with her, and people came up, gave talks, and blah, blah, blah. And then finally, the dean of students came up and said, your sons and daughters are going to leave the auditorium. They're going to go down the hallway to where one of the majors they think they might be interested in. They're going to sign up for their first semester classes. And so parents stay here. Our daughter and all the young people left. And then the dean of students said, when we're done and you go back to pick up your son or daughter, you will not be allowed into the room where they're signing up for their classes. And he said, this is the time you need to start letting go. And my thought in my head, I didn't say it out loud, was, you idiot. If this is the first time you're letting go, your kid is screwed.
Truth. But I think that's actually a prime example of that's sometimes the first time where parents are relinquishing some control. And again, it's not even there's no knock to parents. I look at the education system where we've really relied heavily on parental involvement to ensure that these students, young women specifically, are successful. So yeah, I mean, if that's the first time that all of a sudden the parents are being like, here's a boundary, you can't cross it, that's an issue for the parents.
And it may seem kind of simple, waking yourself up in the morning or eating adequately. It may seem like, well, duh. But those little things are also important because otherwise they can get derailed pretty quick, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, nutrition, sleep hygiene, and physical fitness. I talk actually probably ad nauseum about how they are these sneaker or I guess sleeper issues that we don't address enough. Because again, we're so focused on academic success when in reality, all of those things, eating, getting rest, it impacts a number of things. And then actually being physically active, those are all things that also play into your mental well-being. So if we're talking about somebody too that has a history of any type of mental health struggles, well, that kind of emphasizes the need for making sure that they're eating, getting good rest, and being physically active.
A lot of the young adults who I counsel, like the high school seniors, for several years in college especially, I find that one of the things that they struggle with the most is dealing with uncertainty. That it's a big life transition, and there's a lot of life transitions where all of us normally feel uncertain. We don't have it all planned out anymore, but I find a lot of them are not prepared to deal with that part. I wonder if you're finding the same thing.
Yeah. I would say that it was, that existential crisis, right? It's always existed for this emerging adult population. Who am I, right? Identity development. Who do I want to be connected to? Relationships, whether it's intimate or not. And then all of a sudden you're learning, what do I want to do? That independence piece. Who am I? How do I contribute to the world? And sometimes because of social media, we're a little bit too overwhelmed with the possibilities that exist. But to your point, there's also this fear of these unknowns. And when obviously fear is not harnessed appropriately, we know it kind of manifests into anxiety, which is why we see such a a huge increase in a lot of young women and young men too, honestly, that are struggling with either generalized anxiety or social anxiety right now, especially as they are transitioning into adulthood. But let's also kind of peel that back. Look at the environment. Let's look at politics. Let's look at the economy. Like, it's also no wonder that
Yeah.
there's this like increase in uncertainty because there is a lot that we don't have control over. And we also just lived through a pandemic. So talk about being completely powerless. And so like that, I do think that there is an increase in young people that are really struggling with what's to come.
I also think you mentioned it. I want to highlight it, and then you can add to it. What I hear from a lot of the young women also is that they've been told their whole life, you can be whatever you want to be. There's endless choices and all this, and that, which is true. But
Hmm.
on the one hand, that's like, oh my gosh, I can be whatever I want to be. But it's like, oh my God, there's so many choices. And that a lot of young women I see get
Yeah.
overwhelmed with the number of choices.
Yeah, there's almost like a paralysis of trying to make it it's almost like this fear of choosing wrong, right? Like I chose the wrong path. But then to your point, there are just so many options that sometimes people just don't even know where to start. And so because they're at that place, they just don't even initiate. Well, what's the point? There's just so many options. Again, I don't know where to begin.
And I think we've conditioned them, the culture, to believe that if you make one bad, quote unquote, bad choice decision at a junction like that, your whole life will be derailed and you'll never be able to get it back on track. And of course, that's not true. As
No.
somebody who's as old as I am, I can look back and I've read biographies. I've talked to so many people. I know that there's no truth in that, but they think that, and
Yeah.
that's I think part of their paralysis.
Yeah, I mean, they haven't lived to experience that there's more than just bad or good, right? Black or white,
Mm,
or just, like healthy, not healthy. We don't live in a binary world anymore. And so, unfortunately, a lot of that, like acceptance of there being more, really comes from lived experience. And when your brain is still developing, you're referring to what you know. You're referring
yeah.
to what you've seen in your kind of like upbringing. So it's no wonder.
We're talking with Joanna Lilley, Lilley. She owns a company called Lilley Consulting, and she works with young adults, 18 to 30, helping them with the whole college process, preparedness, also how to overcome glitches along the way for them. And I wonder, I think I know this may be too simplistic a question, but having a past history of some kind of mental health issue like depression, anxiety, what does that do for kids' choices and their readiness?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. I do think that we're asking a lot more of those young people. I think those are the types of students too that we're looking at some sort of like pre-college preparedness type program or experience, whether it's like a 1 week, whether it's some sort of like short intensive over the summer, just to give like dipping your toe in the pond to see how you respond to being on a college campus, to handling any type of like social structures that play out in a residence hall, to, like, again, just navigate what it looks like all of a sudden to have a substantial amount of free time. For a parent, I think some of the things that I'm often seeing is, again, does the young adult understand the medications that they're taking and why they need to take them? Do they also understand how to communicate if all of a sudden now they're having side effects that are impacting them? Or if they're, again, not taking them, that's a huge red flag. I think the other piece too is, does the young adult also know that they need supports in addition to? So I know I just led with medication, and that's not obviously the response or
Yeah.
kind of like a part of the treatment journey for a lot of those young people, but sometimes it is. Do they know that they need to continue working with a therapist? Are they open to working with a coach? Have they recently done some sort of psych testing so that they can actually pass that on to the kind of disability or accessibility office to get support with accommodations? Are they willing to actually demonstrate not just, hey, here's this paperwork, but I want to get whatever that support or accommodation is? I would actually say, kind of a little sidebar, I work with a lot of young people that will actually go through the process of like, here, I submitted this paperwork, but I'm terrified of even talking to my professors about my accommodations. And then because there was that fear, they ended up hurting themselves academically. But it was like, but that resource was there all along. So we need to take advantage of it. So long-winded kind of response in all of this is that it takes a lot more work. You need to be more proactive to make sure that the supports are there. I would not lean heavily on just what's on campus as a resource, because campus resources are really, they're limited or they're solution focused. So if we need more, again, just kind of think about what could exist off campus or virtually to kind of help you in that process. But it requires more, especially for parents too.
And I would guess it would help if during the high school years, they've been able to exercise that muscle of advocating for themselves and reaching out and talking to their doctors and things. Otherwise, we're plopping them on, 1,000 miles away, and they've never done that for themselves.
Exactly. Yeah. Unfortunately, all too common, honestly.
Yeah. I wonder too, this leads me into, there are some kids, think this is true. I know people are going to be screaming when they're listening to this. There are some kids who might need a semester off of school or a year off of school, either before college starts, in the middle of college, at the end of their 4 years. I'm wondering where you sit with all that.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of hashtag TakeABreak. I do work with a lot of young adults that are deferring their college admission. And so I actually find that those 18, 19-year-olds are actually really attuned to the growth that they need to be able to just be a better student, not just a student, but like a whole person on campus. They also have pretty profound insight. So when I work with those clients, I'm always excited because I'm like, yes, you know what you're looking for, and we've got a targeted plan for what it is that we're seeking out in terms of experience and skills during this time off. For the students that take a break from college, right? They tried it. What I often find is that one of the first things that I'm having to deal with is we're unpacking a little bit of shame that just played out.
Yeah.
And or this internalized imposter syndrome. Why did that not work out? And sometimes there is a blame, for the student, that campus was not a fit. My roommate was, a total miss. My professors hated me. I mean, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance, right? Or different type of thinking traps that you can kind of hear me playing out. But what I find is that not only do the students want to return to campus, there is more of a sense of urgency than ever to help them reestablish some confidence. And if it is more mental health focused, obviously we need to target that. What just happened, right? Did we have a pretty significant depressive episode? Did you have a panic attack that led to you being like, I can't leave the room, I've got to withdraw from the university, and then everything in between? But the idea there is that sometimes there's a little bit more shame that's associated with it. But I think if I can step back from being in the weeds from those experiences, the biggest thing that's most important, and I also say this until I'm blue in the face, is that college really isn't going anywhere. So if a student decides ahead of time that they want to actually grow a little bit, mature before they show up on campus, great. If they attempted college and it wasn't a fit for whatever reason, mental health or otherwise, it's still okay to take a break. And then you can reassess. Do I even want to go back to school? If I do, great. Can it be the same school? Possibly, right? You have to figure out whatever their return policy is. But regardless, it's all about the student and your readiness. And again, that readiness piece goes back to the very first question that we discussed, which is, where are they at emotionally and in all other areas of wellness outside of the classroom?
Wonder if you could also share, by the way, we're talking to Joanna Lilley, who owns a consulting firm working with young adults, 18 to 30, helping them through the transitions to college, in college, if they're struggling in any way. So she's a great resource. It's kind of a couple layers of question. One of them is just, there are certain gap times that are different than other gap times. I'm curious if you have some thoughts about what are some optimal kinds of things. I was thinking about two of my camp counselors who are coming this summer, and each of them did one of them did a semester, one did a year of college, and it was kind of like, I'm just not motivated, I need a break. And so at the end of the summer, they're going to spend, I think it's 6 weeks in Vermont, working at some kind of an organic farm. I think it's one of those woofing things.
Yeah.
And learning about beehives and organic farming. And then they're going to Italy for, I think, 2 months, and they're going to harvest olives and grapes
That's so
and all
cool.
that. I'm thinking that to me is like, there's so much growth potential in that, as opposed to, and this is going to sound terrible again, just like, working as a barista and just kind of
It,
hanging out in your parents' house. I'm just curious about what kind of experiences you've noticed promote the most growth and insight.
yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. The probably like the one common denominator is whether or not the student is still living at home.
Hmm.
Because that's where it feels like we have, and again, this is anecdotal based on like what I've been working with and seeing, is that the parents have a hard time with whatever kind of like boundaries are in place or the house rules and expectations, especially as it relates to whatever the like cadence was when they were in high school. If the student was kind of high caliber, like the parent was usually like really involved, and now all of a sudden it's like, I'm going to use that example that you just gave, but now you're just quote unquote a barista, right? So there's some judgment, whether or not parents realize it, that kind of comes into play. And then that, even if you do your best to hide it, it's certainly going to be spilling over, and the young adult understands that they are not living up to their potential. Maybe they're not getting out of this experience. And so regardless, all I can say is the best types of gap experiences are ones where you are outside of the home, and it doesn't have to be a full year. It could literally be, I'm going to go somewhere for 4 weeks, or I'm going to go somewhere for just the semester. But find that place, find the community, because those types of experiences are really what's going to give you this life, like experience in life that we have never had, especially if you are just having graduated high school. Chances are you've never really lived outside of the home. And so this is like the first opportunity to like, again, going back to those, 3 I's that I was talking about earlier, the independence, the identity, the intimacy, like those are 3 key components to emerging adulthood. And what better way to kind of explore that when you're outside of your parents' roof?
And if they take a gap semester, year, whatever, and they don't have the money to get an apartment or something, and they are staying at home, what is it that the parents can do that would contribute to their daughter growing up in that time, even if they are still staying at home?
Well, I don't want to completely say that the like staying at home is a bad idea.
Yeah.
I think where it works is where there is a clear plan, like, and it's communicated what parents are wanting to see from their daughter and what their daughter has actually identified for herself. Here's what I want to do. Here's the plan for what I'm going to get out of these experiences. Here's what I need from you as parents for support, etc. And so I think having a clear plan is what really makes the difference. And so, and I say it's not just communicated. I want it in writing. I'm like one of those old school people that's like, look, I'm not saying it's a contract, but if we have it in writing, then it's real, right? And we can reflect back on it. Where are you in terms of your goals? Where are we as a family in terms of this support? And I do think that there's an opportunity to, parents, if your young adult is working and they're actually making money, let's talk about financial literacy, because we do not talk about that enough. I'm not saying that your daughter needs to pay rent, but let's actually give her the experience of every part of her paycheck. You're asking her to contribute X amount to the house fund, right? Or something like that. And as a parent, you can obviously hold on to that if you want to and give it back at the end of their gap experience or whatever it is that you discuss as a family. But you're teaching a lot of these life skills. Now, my only hesitation in all of this is that it still does put a lot of pressure on parents to be overly involved in this process. And so that's the like $1 million question. Is your child, your young adult woman, right, living at home going to create more stress for you as a parent, especially if you have your own anxiety, like managing what's going on? Then that might also be just an opportunity to kind of have that conversation of, hey, maybe you can stay with us just for the fall. And then we need you to go live with your aunt and uncle for the spring, or, something like that. I don't think there's anything wrong with living with other family members too, as long as they're supportive of, again, whatever that gap experience plan is.
I also think I think one of the things, you tell me if this is true from your experience, I think one of the things that helps parents be more open to what you're talking about is at 18 or whatever, 19-year-old came to their parents and said, look, I've been thinking about this. I decided I don't want to go back next semester, or I don't want to start. And here's why. and here's my plan. And they thought it through. And so
Mhm.
the parents aren't like, they're just like blowing it off. They're just immature, all that. It's just like, wow, they thought this through and they have a plan. And then like you said, writing it down, not necessarily a contract, but it's a level of accountability. Like we need to check back and make sure you're on track, or you need to
Yeah.
make sure you're on track is even a better way of saying it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's tremendously helpful, and I think it's also important for parents to understand too that it's their choice as well.
Yeah.
Because just because your child doesn't go off to college, or maybe they did and now all of a sudden, like, it's not working out, I've gotta come home. Well, coming home doesn't actually have to be the only option, especially if you as a parent are raising other younger children and you've gotten into a rhythm and routine and this child's supposed to be out of the house. We've got to have a real like conversation. And as a parent, or like if you're a part of a parenting unit, you can decide whether or not you want to host your child again, or if you need to redirect. Again, this is where I would say lean on other family members, or if it's becoming more of a like mental health crisis or something like that, we're just having a conversation of like, you're going to stay with us for a week. We're going to figure out a plan. The plan does not include you still living with us. We love you
Mm.
to death, but this is not how this is going to work. So we got to figure something else out.
I think in general, you mentioned it before, the culture has a hard time with what we're talking about. One of our sons, he went to college, he graduated in 4 years, and then he applied for it and he got accepted into Teach for America. So he went to Chicago, he worked in inner city middle school for 2 years, I think a 2-year commitment. And he loved the working with the kids. He didn't like the bureaucracy. He did not want to be a teacher. He was a political science major. So everybody was like, "Oh, you're going to law school?" "No, I don't want to be a lawyer." But anyway, when he was done, he had saved money and he bought a tent and he bought a backpack and bought a ukulele and he took off. He went to New Zealand, didn't know anybody. And he was gone for 22 months, just
Wow.
backpacking around, and he ran out of money, so he stopped and picked fruit for a month or 2 in an orchard. Then he traveled and worked at a seafood restaurant in Australia, for a while, and then he travels some more. But my point was gonna be that we had a lot of adult friends who are like, "Are you okay with that?" Like we're like, "Oh my god, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread." This is so
Yeah.
He was already mature, but this is so empowering him to know he can make it happen because he was
Yeah.
flying by the seat of his pants. But I think a lot of adults have a problem with, even if their kids take off a semester, it's like there's this fear of, "Oh my god, they'll never go back, and then they're gonna have a
Yeah.
crummy life."
Yep. I love that your son did that. I think that also speaks to the level of like parental attachment that you had too, and the trust that he could kind of sort it out. I do think a lot of parents struggle, at least those that I work with, but regardless, I would actually say that story, I wish more young people did things like that.
Mhm.
Even going back to like what he did, Teach for America is a great experience. I've actually had several friends personally who did that, and it was like what kind of set them off on the paths that they ended up landing or going down professionally. But all that is to say, your son probably learned the most ever in those 22 months. And yet he also probably has experiences that he will continue to lean on based on that time, abroad. And what better place too to learn some of these like fun things? Hey, I ran out of money. So what do I need to do to make some money so that I can actually like put a roof over my head? Or if you're in a tent, let's go to food. How do I put some food in my mouth?
There's
So
several times he sat in front of, I don't know if it's the train stations playing his ukulele and people would put money, give him money, all kinds
I
of things.
mean,
But yeah,
to each their own. Good for him, because that
yeah.
to me is an adventure. And I think more of our young people are afraid to do what is outside of kind of the norm. And the norm is still pushing people. When you're 18 and you graduate high school, you should go to college because that's like the path that you need to take. But I'm going to continue to say it. College isn't going anywhere. I think we need to lean on having more of these adventures, even if they're in our own backyard rather than, halfway across the world. But still something to learn from is going to be tremendously important.
We're talking to Joanna Lilley. She owns a company called Lilly. I'm sorry, I got that wrong. It's Lilly Consulting, right? And she works with young adults, supporting them through the whole how do you figure out your future process and the college process and gap year process and struggling in college and all that kinds of things. She has a lot of experience in that field, and so she's a great resource. I'm going to ask her to give you some information about how to reach her in just a moment. But this is a loaded question, but if you had to give parents a piece or two of advice about how to best prepare your daughter to be ready to, embark when they're 18, what would that be?
I mean, not to be a squeaky wheel, I honestly think what we talked about earlier would be the best advice, which is be proactive. I would say start early. Don't wait until, like they've just graduated high school. If we can do it junior and senior year of high school, start to kind of peel back and let your daughter start to initiate, start to keep her own schedule, ask her to call her pharmacy to make sure that her medications are on time, have her schedule her doctor's appointments. Really start to at least put a little bit of that adulting on her and see how she handles and or responds to those requests. Because the reality is, I think we'd be surprised that your daughter will probably level up and show up in the way that she needs it. So the earlier that you could do that, the earlier I think we can all know that if her plan is to go off to college or whatever it is that she's going to do after high school, she's going to be prepared for it and able to advocate for herself or be self-sufficient.
I have to ask you this before I let you go. What do you think about the 360 app where I have these young women who go off to college and their parents are still following them around 24/7. I don't know if I'm just old and crabby or what, but I just can't wrap my head around my parents following me around when I went off to college.
I know. It's funny because I literally just talked about this out on Friday for a very long time. I also struggle with it. Look, I get parents why there's some sense of security in knowing where your kid is, but I also think that it never really allows them the space to entirely be independent and make decisions for themselves. Because if they're going out and doing something and then all of a sudden they get a text, why are you at this location? Or why aren't you in class? Or, there's oversight that needs to be removed. And again, I know that we live or we're kind of in a fear-based space of there's a lot of creepy people out there and how will I make sure that my kid's okay? And I think there's a better way to do it. Teach safety. What does it mean to be safe on a college campus or, on a trip abroad? Whatever the case may be. I personally am anti, tracking your kids. So I think that's my own thing. I try not to be judgmental for parents that feel uncomfortable removing that. But for the parents that try it, I think it helps them also understand that at some point we have to shift away from being a parent where you're monitoring your kid all the time to actually just being a partner in their launching into adulthood.
And we can teach them street smarts, all the way through their childhoods. We can allow them, if you live in a city that has a subway or whatever, you can allow them to do it themselves and buy the ticket and get on and learn how to take care of themselves and never go out with, unless you're with one of your friends. And your friends can know where you are because you're at a party together. You can check up on each other. There's so many ways they can take care of themselves that they may not if they know their parents are going to do it for them.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
So how can people get a hold of you? What's the best way?
Best way is to just land on my website, which is www.lilleyconsulting.com. Actually, from there, you'll find all sorts of things like podcast interviews, because I also host a podcast, which you were a guest on, and excited to check that one out. Articles that I've written, honestly, in a lot of these topics that we've discussed, but to kind of dive a little bit deeper in the content. And then just information about how I work, what I do, and anything that might be helpful as a resource for parents.
So for those of you who are driving around in a car or walking in the neighborhood, as always, I will put that link in my show notes so you don't have to memorize it right now. And so just go to www.drtimjordan.com like you always do, and that link will be there for you to get a hold of Joanna Lilley for her services. Thank you so much for what you're doing. It's such a need. I see so many young people who are struggling with the uncertainties and not knowing how to take care of themselves. So it's nice that there's people like you out there who can give them some guidance.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Raising Daughters. Hopefully, you've learned something useful about girls and young women and how to help them navigate the pressures, challenges, and opportunities of modern life. If you want to become a more effective parent, keep listening to the show at drtimjordan.com and let the conversations shape you. Build that one-of-a-kind connection with your daughters in the most profound and meaningful ways possible, shaping them into strong, confident women of the future. That's all for now. See you next week for another episode of Raising Daughters.